Hello everyone, I am the storyteller. Tonight I'll tell you a story of memories that don't belong to anyone, and a town that forgot how to escape itself. When geologist Elias Holt arrived in Sulphur Ridge, he was only looking for rocks, fault lines, and quiet. But what he found was alive, it breathed, and it remembered him long before he was ever born. Sit down, don't look out the window, and if you hear footsteps walking in circles outside, don't open the door, just listen. This is the story of a place where memory doesn't die, it wakes up. They say the earth remembers ... not the way we do with dates and names and photographs, but in the slow, grinding ache of stone collapsing into itself. The wind doesn't whistle out here, it moans, a long, dry groan like something ancient trying to breathe through all that dirt. I didn't come to Sulphur Ridge for ghosts, I came for strata, for faults and faults alone, but when I left, I was no longer certain the land was inanimate or that I was sane, or that there was ever a difference between the two. There's a moment buried deep in the first week that I keep trying to rewrite. A sound I heard, a shape I saw at the lip of a gulch I never found again. Every time I close my eyes, it's there, like it's waiting, like I brought it back. Let me tell you what happened. I arrived at dusk. Not the cinematic kind, this was the real thing. Dull brown, and smeared like a bruise across the sky. The town unfolded at the edge of the basin like it regretted being built. One blinking street light, a shuttered gas station with a sun-faded Pepsi sign, and beyond that, jagged hills rising like vertebrae through the dust. Sulphur Ridge wasn't on any GPS. You had to know someone. In my case, it was a field supervisor, Calgio, who'd owed me a favor from a dig site back in 18. Said a property owner had reported an unusual subsurface anomaly out here. Could be a collapsed lava tube, he'd guessed, or just a sinkhole with pretensions. Either way, I needed the work. And the silence. The motel had no name, just a crooked hand-painted sign that read rooms. I was given a metal key, not a card. Room 7, the door stuck like it hadn't been opened in years, though the dust on the sill told a different story. I unpacked quickly, field gear, notebooks, portable seismograph, a half-dead satellite phone. Last thing out of the bag was my trigger object, the stone, not from here, from Utah. A dig I led 5 years ago, rounded edges, pale gray, veined with something that looked like blood and low light. I didn't know why I brought it anymore, habit or penance. The room had that stale odor of decades-old air conditioning and mildew trapped in wood. But beneath it, a sharper scent, faint but unmistakable, sulfur. I made my first notes that evening. Soul, alkaline air, dry, 8% humidity, wind direction, inconsistent, terrain, fractured basalt with signs of erosion inconsistent with known weathering patterns, and then this, scribbled at the edge of the page. Heard something under the floor, scraping. I went outside to clear my head. That's when I saw him. An old man in a chair just across the road. No porch, no house, just a chair, sitting like he'd been waiting there all day. Or all week. He raised a hand but said nothing. I nodded back, storms coming, he finally said. Voice cracked like dry paper. No clouds. Don't need clouds. Earth storms, not sky storms. I should have asked what that meant. Should have asked a lot of things. But I just said have a good night and walked back inside. The scraping sound was louder, rhythmic, I pressed my ear to the floor. Something shifted beneath the boards like rock being dragged over rock. Then silence. I should have left the next morning, but the core samples hadn't arrived yet, and I had nowhere else to be. So I stayed. God help me, I stayed. I woke to the sound of static. Not from the TV, I hadn't turned it on. It was coming from my sat phone, even though it wasn't connected to anything local. Just a low, dry hiss like a radio caught between frequencies. It stopped the moment I touched it outside. The sun hadn't fully crested the ridge yet, but the heat was already climbing. I brewed instant coffee with motel tap water and drank it standing up, staring out the smeared window. A group of vultures circled something in the distance. They moved in slow, methodical spirals, natural, but unsettling in how focused they were. The core samples were late. I called the lab, no signal. The motel manager, a woman who might have been 40 or 70, depending on the light, just shrugged. Phones don't work right here, she said. Too much iron in the ground. Any place I could plug into a landline? She laughed, no smile. You're in Sulphur Ridge, hon. We barely plug in the coffee pots. I drove out to the site. It was 11 miles west, up an old access road that had half returned to the dirt it sprang from. The anomaly was marked by a rusted wire fence and an old mining sign pockmarked with bullet holes. Keep OUT federal property. No emblem, no department name. The hole itself wasn't natural. Perfectly round, about 6 meters across, depth unknown. The edges had been burned, literally scorched, like someone had dropped a furnace into the desert. I set up the portable seismograph and lowered a weighted line, 60 feet, then slack, no bottom. I tried tossing a flare down. It fell for a long time. No impact sound, just vanished. That's when I heard it, a voice, faint, not whispering, chanting. My rational mind defaulted to the obvious, wind passing over uneven geometry in the shaft, creating harmonic resonance. It's happened before, moaning caverns, singing caves. But this was different. It wasn't a tone. It was words, not English, not anything I recognized. I stood very still and tried not to breathe. The chanting stopped the second I moved. I checked the recorder, static, just like the sat phone, but right at the end, barely audible 3 syllables. Almost human, almost a name, mine. I packed up and drove back faster than I meant to. The dust kicked up behind me, rose like smoke. That evening I visited the local bar, the Blue Cistern. Half the letters had burned out on the sign, and nobody seemed inclined to fix them. Inside, the air was thick with creosote and resignation. A few heads turned when I walked in, outsider. No one said it, but the label hung in the air. A man with a scar down his cheek nodded toward the empty stool next to him. You the rock doc, geologist, he grunted. Same thing, we talked. He gave me a name. Jory Kenney. Born here, left for 20 years. Came back after the mines shut down. Said he worked security for one of the old federal sites out west. Claimed it had nothing to do with weapons testing. When I asked what it did have to do with, he paused. Do you believe in deep time? I study rock layers older than vertebrate life. So yes, that's not what I meant. He sipped his drink. I mean time that isn't just old time that doesn't move right. I said nothing. Things went down into the earth here long before people. Long before thought, and they stayed down there. Still are, but lately Something's waking up. You feel it? I heard ... resonance. Could be a pressure change or... He cut me off. It ain't pressure. It's presence. And then, softer. You ever read about the old graves out by Prospector's Ridge? No. He looked at me like he didn't believe that. Or didn't care you should. He slid off the stool and left. I watched him go and noticed the bartender watching me. You ask too many questions. She said I barely asked one. Exactly, I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear yet, but anticipation. Something was under that earth. Something that remembered. And somehow, I had the feeling it remembered me. I went back the next morning with a heavier rig. Rope, harness, a GoPro. To backup lights, chalk, field notes, and one irrational compulsion I couldn't explain. The urge wasn't scientific. It wasn't even curious. It was magnetic. The hole in the earth had changed. I'm sure of it. The diameter was the same, but the lip looked newer, cleaner, as though someone had reburned the rock edges overnight. There were footprints bare, just one set. They led in a perfect arc around the pit's edge and vanished. No prints leading to it. Just around, just gone, I rappelled in. 30 feet down, the light turned strange, not dimmer, thicker, like it was passing through something viscous. Shadows didn't fall the way they should. Ankles didn't hold. I kept going. At 80 feet, the walls changed. No longer natural rock. They were smoothed, beveled, chiseled with a geometry that made my stomach not too symmetrical, too precise. My hand brushed something, a carving. Not a petroglyph, not writing, just a spiral, maybe 7 inches across. Deeply etched, stained with something darker than soot. The longer I looked, the more it seemed to rotate. Even though I knew it wasn't moving, my flashlight sputtered, then went out. The backup worked for 10 seconds, then it too failed. I hung there, suspended in the dark, rope creaking above me. That's when the voice came again. Right behind my left ear, low, crooning, and unmistakably female. You came back too soon. I jerked, twisted the rope. No one. The GoPro light caught something before it died. A glint, maybe 10 feet down. A face, not a skull, not a hallucination. A face, perfectly preserved, pale, mouth open, eyes still wet. I climbed, fast. By the time I reached the surface, the sky had darkened, but not like evening, like an eclipse. The sun was up, but the world was dim, colors washed out. My watch read to 17 p.m. My phone said 5:03. The motel clock still blinked 3:33. I drove straight back to town, fingers cramping around the steering wheel. Jory was sitting outside the bar, just sitting, watching. You touch the spiral, he said. I didn't answer. Once you touch it, it knows. That night I had the first dream. I was standing in a canyon I've never visited in waking life, but I know it. The cliffs were sheer and trembling, like they were holding their breath. In the dream I knelt and pressed my hand to the ground, and it breathed back. Then I heard the sound, a grinding, wet churn, like something vast turning beneath shale and skin. And then her face, the woman from the pit. Lips cracked, eyes bloodshot, but unblinking. Why did you leave us in the dark? I woke, gasping. The motel room felt 20 degrees colder than the air outside. My skin was damp. I reached for my notebook to write it down and found something already written on the page. not my handwriting, just 3 words. You were here. The next morning, I set out with a different purpose. I wasn't looking for anomalies in the rock anymore. I was looking for patterns in architecture, in history, in the way people moved when they thought no one was watching. Sulphur Ridge wasn't on any modern map, but it had all the bones of a town that once mattered. False fronts on every building, old hitching posts, a schoolhouse converted into a voting center, though no one had voted here in decades. Everything was covered in dust, yet nothing looked abandoned. That was the unsettling part. It wasn't neglect. It was maintenance without intention, preservation without life. The church was the first place I noticed the subtle changes. Whitewashed walls, wooden beams dark with time. The sign read First Light Tabernacle, but the cross had been removed. In its place, a rusted iron ring bolted into the steeple. Inside, the pews were pristine. No cobwebs, no mold. Fresh candles in every holder, and at the front, a painting. Not of Christ, not of any saint. A woman in frontier dress, hands folded, I assume shut with coarse thread. Behind her, the desert, and something rising out of it. A shape I couldn't quite hold in my mind every time I tried. It slid sideways. A voice broke the silence. You found Mother Holt. I turned. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, wearing a sun-bleached apron and a crook brooch in the shape of a lizard. She led us here, the woman said, after the first collapse. When the mines went to deep. Collapse, I asked. There was a cave-in? She smiled dry and joyless. More than earth collapsed, boy. Time did too. I asked about the painting. Every few years we repaint her. The face never stays. She said this like it was normal. I laughed. At the town archive, which turned out to be a single-file cabinet in the back of the old post office, I met Callie, the newest resident of Sulphur Ridge, early 30s. Practical, blunt to caffeinated. Said she moved out here from Colorado after a hard divorce and a harder detox. I catalog old ghost towns for a preservation group, she said, or I used to. Now I mostly feed cats and argue with conspiracy theorists. She offered to show me the town's original plats. Laid across the table were brittle, water-damaged survey maps from the 1880s. Only they didn't match the current layout of the town. Streets were named after prophets. Now they were named after minerals. A whole quadrant was missing. What should have been east of Main Street was just ... erased. They call it the shifting, say the land rewrites itself, like it's dreaming. She rolled her eyes. Personally, I think some folks out here are way too friendly with payout. But she wasn't laughing ... and a manila folder labeled unfiled, do not share. I found something else. A newspaper clipping from 1934, headline, Town starves, but ritual continues. Subhead, Dust Bowl wipes out crops. Locals resort to archaic rites for rain. Below it, a photo, blurry, a procession of robed figures descending into a pit, torches held high. A child at the front with someone wrapped in canvas slung over their back. The caption read, Final observance before Sulphur Ridge closes its gates to outsiders. I looked at Callie. You believe any of this? She shrugged. Don't have to. The land does. As I left, she called after me. Ever been out to the cemetery? No, you should. You'll like what you don't find. The cemetery was on the North Ridge, and Fanes, no gate, but the gravestones, if you could call them, that were peculiar. Some were just indentations in the earth, like the land had swallowed the marker whole. Others bore dates, but no names, and just one was fresh. The dirt still loose, no name, no marker, just a spiral carved into the soil with a finger. I stepped closer, and that's when I noticed the smell, not rot, not sulfur, coal oil. I looked around, nothing, not a soul in sight. Just the wind carving shapes into the sand that looked almost like letters. And in the distance, down by the dry wash, a woman in frontier dress, standing still, face turned away. When I looked again, she was gone. The quadrant east of Maine didn't just vanish from the archives. It was gone from the town itself. Streets that should have existed simply didn't. Buildings didn't match their foundations. A faint grid remained, lines of worn-down curbstone, scattered porch steps that led to air, but the structures were gone, and the locals refused to acknowledge it. When I asked about it at the diner, a young waitress named Melody said flatly, "Ain't no East Side, but there used to be." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, not anymore. The cook behind the counter turned the radio up loud. White noise and an old country gospel song fuzzed through the static. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and walked toward where the roads should have continued. They didn't. The pavement didn't, and it bled out, crumbled and feathered into the soil like it had never been poured right. And yet something was still there, not visible, but present. The wind changed direction every few minutes. Not randomly, but rhythmically. I dropped my compass, the needle spun. A cold spot hit my chest like a palm pressed against my ribs. I saw movement at the corner, my vision a shape darting between where two buildings used to stand. A child, a deer, I couldn't tell, but when I followed I found something worse. A slab of concrete, cracked in the center, like a vault had been forced open from beneath. Beside it, the same spiral, this time burned into the surface with something that had bubbled and blackened the stone. Then I heard the laughter, high, light echoing, but it came from the ground. I dropped to one knee and put my hand on the concrete. Warm. Too warm for 9 a.m. desert shade, ... and behind the warmth, a pulse, faint, measured, like a second heartbeat. I went back to Kelly that afternoon, told her about the erased quadrant, the spiral, the pulse. She didn't blink. There's a reason they never rebuilt that part, because of a collapse, because it won't stay rebuilt. She opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of black and white photographs. Every one showed a building on East Pennant Street, a house, a store, even a church. Over time, in each photo, they degraded, not like rot, like erasure. The lines got blurrier, angles bent subtly wrong. In the last photo, there was nothing but a swirl of sand, with shadows that made no sense for the time of day. No one took this picture, she said. It developed itself. One of those old cameras from the archives. Then how, I don't know, but it keeps happening. Every few decades, someone tries to build there, and every time it gets undone. She handed me a final photograph, different from the others, no structures, just earth, but something was wrong with the sky-black streaks, like cracks in glass. And at the center, a figure, indistinct, arms too long, hair or tendrils streaming upward, not down, scrawled on the back, in faded ink. Where the map ends, the memory begins. That night I returned to the erased quadrant alone, brought the GoPro, my journal, and the Utah stone. I walked past the old curbed line and felt it immediately, a drop in air pressure. My ears popped. Dot, dot, the sand shifted under my boots, then stopped. I turned the camera on, panned across the nothing, and right there, in the viewfinder, a house, a white one, peeling paint, a rusted swing. I lowered the camera. Nothing there, raised it again. House, lowered, dot, dot, nothing. And yet I could smell it. Cedar wood, dry rot, coal oil. I took one step forward and everything changed. A whisper in my right ear, "You lived here once." I turned to run and trip on something solid. It was a doormat with my last name on it. I began with the painting in the church. The woman in frontier garb with sewn-shut eyes had haunted me for days. Her presence was too deliberate to be metaphor, too recurring to be coincidence. When I returned to the church, the door was already open. Inside, it was darker than before. Candles had melted down into twisted rivulets across the altar, pooling like wax blood. But the painting had changed. The woman's head was tilted now just slightly, enough to throw the whole posture off balance. The stitches around her eyes were fresher, redder. Her hands no longer rested in her lap, they were reaching, palms turned upward. Someone had added a faint spiral over her heart. The records, what few there were, traced the founding of Sulphur Ridge back to 1874. During the tail end of the Western expansion, a wagon train fleeing something they never named. They didn't come for gold, they came for land that didn't sleep. That's what the documents said over and over again. We settle where the land wakes, the hollow earth stirs beneath us. She was chosen to hold the spiral. She was Eleanora Holt, a former midwife accused of multiple crimes in Missouri Territory, child theft, heresy, something called soul entrapment in one court transcript. But the charges were dropped after every witness died within a year. She led the founding families into the basin, 29 adults, 11 children. They vanished from public record for 2 decades, but they kept journals. Callie had smuggled one from the back of the archive. It was bound in animal hide, scrawled in 3 distinct hands, switching erratically between English, Latin, and something unrecognizable. The ink faded, but the spiral icon was carved deep into the pages, sometimes with enough force to tear the paper. Excerpts. We hear her below, not in words, but in rhythm, a groaning like time under strain. Children change first. They walk in circles when no one watches. They speak in the wrong order. Mother Holt says the spiral is not a shape, it's a gate, coiled shut until the world deserves to end again. Our blood is the key, our forgetting the lock. At the edge of town, just past the cemetery, I found what used to be called the outer circle, a crude ring of standing stones, weather-worn and leaning like teeth rotting out of a mouth. Locals avoided it. Even the vultures wouldn't land there. At the center of the ring was a depression in the earth, not dug, not sunken, pressed, like something immense had knelt there. Carved into one of the stones, the spiral is not an image. IT is a process. I stood there for almost an hour, feeling like I was waiting for something. I didn't know what, until the wind dropped, and a woman's voice, soft and low, whispered something from behind the largest stone, not words, humming. I walked around the stone, nothing there, but in the dust I saw fresh footprints, bare, small, spiraling inward toward the center. I brought the journal to Jory at the Blue Cistern that night. He didn't want to touch it. She was the first and she be the last, he muttered. Mother Holt. She didn't die, he said. They say she coiled herself into the land, buried in shape, not in body. You hear the spiral enough times, you stop, needy your eyes. What does that mean? He looked straight at me, hard. She made the town forget. That's the only way the cycle works. Back in the motel, I studied the spiral on my Utah stone. The veins in it wasn't mineral, not copper, not iron. It was organic. A coiled pattern, identical to the spiral in the church painting, and in the dust at the outer circle, and in the pages of the journal. When I held it to the mirror, the shape didn't reverse. It stayed the same. I set it on the knitstand. Woke 3 hours later to find it on my chest. I didn't decide to return to the erased quadrant. I woke up there, not sleepwalking, sleepwaking. I remember dreaming of spirals, one growing beneath the skin of my forearm like a scaran, then nothing, until I was standing barefoot in the sand where the house had appeared in my camera days earlier. And now it was there, no tricks, no digital lens, no half-seen flickered, just dot, dot, dot there, a white, single-story house, porch, swing, shuttered windows, door ajar like it had been waiting. My mind reeled. I knew this house, not from the town, from before, from nowhere I could place. I stepped inside. The smell hit first cedar and coal oil, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. The air was warm, but carried no dust. The wood floors groaned familiar beneath my weight. Family photos lined the wall, only every frame was empty. No faces, just silhouettes blurred beyond recognition. Except one, a boy 6, maybe 7. Holding a rock, the same spiral vein stone I brought from Utah, my stone. The label beneath the photo read, returned. In the kitchen, a rotary phone lay off the hook. I picked it up. A voice whispered, "You left us behind." I found the basement door behind the pantry, hidden by a croaked spice rack. The stairs groaned with every step. At the bottom, red clay walls, damp, faint smell of rot. And at the center, a cradle, old iron, filled with what looked like cash and hair. On the floor beside it, a child's drawing. Spiral suns, stick figures holding hands. One figure alone in a corner, circled in red. The caption read, "He won't sleep, he remembers." Then something broke in me. Not a feeling, a memory. I was here. I had been here before. As a child, my mother frantic, my father absent. Something beneath the floor, whispering every night. I had drawn this exact spiral. In a notebook my therapist would later burn, calling it dangerous pattern fixation. I remembered a doctor's voice. His trauma responses are unusually topographic, and I remembered the pills, years of them. They hadn't dulled the memories. They had misnamed them. This wasn't trauma, it was suppression. My parents hadn't died in a car crash. That was the story I was given. The truth was simpler, harder. They had vanished in this house, in this town, in 1993, and no one remembered they existed except me. I staggered out of the basement, heart hammering, the smell of ash in my teeth. In the hallway, the photos had changed. Now every frame showed the same face, mine, at different ages. Some I remembered, some I hadn't lived yet. In one photo I was an old man, kneeling by the pit, holding the spiral stone out like an offering, eyes sewn shut. Outside, the house was gone again, just sand. and a single set of footprints, mine spiraling inward. The name came from the bottom drawer of a locked file cabinet in the Sulphur Ridge post office. The lock was old, the key older. Kelly found it taped under the desk, wrapped in wax paper. Inside, a red file stamped with an official-looking seal that had been half burned off. The surviving label read, Project Hermes, Site number 019. Do not unseal except by order of Central Clearance Level 7. I opened it anyway. The documents were brittle, typewritten, and sealed in plastic. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, but what they described wasn't. Initial discovery occurred during post-collapse survey in July 1977. Anomalous terrain deformation. A site number 19 suggested the presence of geologic inconsistency, organic movement in subbasalt strata. Evidence of artificial structure confirmed at 84 feet. There were photos, grainy black and white prints. One showed what looked like a stone door buried beneath the sand, not carved grown, like the rock had fused shut around itself. A spiral was visible in the center, etched with perfect symmetry. Another photo showed a team of 6 men in hazmat suits standing before the door. The caption read, Last known image of survey unit Echo. The next page was stranger. Post-contact subjects exhibit extreme audio hallucinations, spatial disorientation, and acute memory slippage. Interviews following proximity exposure indicate temporal nonlinearity and shared dream states involving a female figure with sealed eyes. Subject responses converge around one term, mother. Next to that, a hand-drawn sketch, not by scientists. It looked like a child's drawing in red crayon of a woman underground, arms too long, spiral where her heart should be. Below it, scribbled in pen, were for words we never closed IT. I showed the file to Jory. He didn't ask how I found it. You ever hear about the repeater? He asked. I shook my head. Government built a listening post near the erased quadrant. Said it was a Cold War relic. Bullshit. It was a sensor array buried deep. They were trying to triangulate ... something. What? Her heartbeat. Jory lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. They were hoping to isolate the sound, box it in, like she was a frequency. But the more they listened, the more they heard things they weren't supposed to. One by one, they started going blind. Not physically, spiritually, they could see just fine. They just didn't see the same world as us anymore. He tapped ash into an empty beer bottle. Eventually they pulled out, left the equipment. Some of it's still out there, buzzing in the dirt. I found it that afternoon, a rusted tower half swallowed by dune and desert sage, tangled in cables. Most were severed, but one still led underground into a small concrete hatch half covered by dead brush. No lock, just a wheel crank inside. A single-room station with walls covered in dials, paper charts, and reel-to-reel recorders. Dust covered everything, but the power light on one console blinked red. I turned it on. The speakers crackled. Then a voice, not a recording, a broadcast, real-time, female, repeating one sentence over and over in a looped rhythm. We are the memory you left behind. We are the spiral wound into your breath. I hit record. The moment I did, a smell filled the room, sulfur and wet soil, and something crawled across the floor, not visible, just a weight, a presence. The voice changed. Welcome back, then silence. Every light on the panel went green. On the desk was a binder labeled Hermes Sublevels. Inside, blueprints, not of buildings, of tunnels. They extended far beneath the erased quadrant, downward in a spiral, handwritten note across the last page. Do not descend alone. There is no down anymore, only inward. The town began to forget itself. It started subtly. Melody, the diner waitress, forgot how to use the register. Not because she was confused, she claimed it had never been there before, even while standing directly in front of it. The sheriff there was a sheriff, apparently stopped responding to calls. His cruiser sat parked outside the station, keys dangling from the ignition. Motor idling, I peered inside. No one in the seat. Just a loop tape playing from the dash. A woman's voice reading coordinates. Callie found a stray doll one morning on her porch, starving. Ribs like blades, she fed it, bathed it, even named it Finn. The next day, the bowl was untouched, the leash unwound, and the dog was gone. No tracks, no memory. She didn't remember naming it or finding it. Just the bowl full of water, still warm. The town clock tower began chiming at irregular hours, always at 3:33, of course, but also at 2:17, 11:04, 6:06. Each chime triggered something in the air, a change in pressure, a ripple that made the hairs on your neck rise. People began walking in spirals, dot, first the children, circles in dirt lots, in the sand behind the school. Then the adults, not all at once, but enough to be noticed. I watched Jory from a distance as he walked 5 perfect loops around the dry fountain at the square, then sat on the edge and wept silently. When I asked him about it later, he said he didn't remember anything after pouring his morning coffee. The motel manager nailed her windows shut, told me she hadn't slept in days because the breathing's too loud. What breathing? I asked. She laughed. The earth's, of course, yours too, now. At the church, the painting changed again. Mother Holt's mouth was open now. The stitches from her eyes were gone. Her pupils had no irises, just black. The spiral over her heart had expanded, curling down her chest, over her arms, and someone had written and said across the altar, "The remembering has begun. I tried to leave just once. Packed my gear, gassed up the truck, headed west, 7 miles out. I hit a detour sign that hadn't been there the week before. The road behind it was washed out, no tire tracks, no rainfall in weeks. I tried another route, 15 miles south, same result. A sinkhole the size of a barn yawning in the middle of the blacktop. I stopped a local and asked if there'd been a cave-in. He looked at me like I was speaking another language. What cave-in? Back in town. People stopped asking who I was. They started recognizing me, calling me Doc, Eli, son. Even people I'd never met before. I asked Callie, "You've been here before?" She said softly, "I just didn't know I knew you until yesterday." That night I returned to the erased quadrant. There were houses now, 5 of them, all half-formed, ghost frames. Children's voices echoed in the air, but there were no children. Just dolls left in the sand, arranged in spirals. And at the center, a familiar figure, the woman from the painting, eyes open, mouth moving, no sound. I stepped closer. My heart stuttered. It wasn't her, it was me. Older, worn, my own face looking back. The mouth moved again. And this time I understood. Downward is forward, inward is forever. I returned to the tower at first light. The horizon was bruised with a storm that wasn't moving, just hovering, pulsing. The hatch lay open like a mouth waiting to be fed. I didn't bring much: a recorder, flashlight, rope, my field journal, the spiral stone from Utah. At the bottom of the narrow shaft, where the government's forgotten station hummed and flickered, I found the tunnel, not dug, not carved, formed. The walls were smooth, too smooth, not from erosion. This wasn't water work. It was organic, like bone grown around an absence. It sloped downward at a perfect angle, a curve too regular to be natural, but too chaotic to be engineered. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became, not silence, but muffled presence. The spiral wasn't just a shape here. It was a path, 40 meters down. Light began to warp, not dim, but warped. The beam from my flashlight curved subtly around corners that weren't there. Shadows doubled, 60 meters. The air turned moist. Breathing felt like inhaling through cloth soaked in iron and earth. I heard voices, not echoes, memories, whispered arguments. My father's voice, my mother's, the night they left, only they didn't say anything, they wept. Then, my own voice as a child, repeating the same phrase over and over. I didn't mean to go down. I just followed the shape. 100 meters. I reached the first chamber. Circular, perfectly symmetrical walls covered in symbols. Spirals, yes, but also loops, knots, curls that reminded me of synaptic diagrams. At the center, a pillar waist high. On it, a handprint the size of mine. I pressed my palm to it, not by choice. Something pulled, the room responded. A deep tone shuddered through the stone, vibrating up my spine. Behind me, a new tunnel opened where there had been a blank wall. The stone unfolded, beyond it bones, not human. Too long, too curved. Spiral femurs, rib cages that seemed to coil around themselves. Skulls with 3 eye sockets in a triangle. And at the far end, a door again, not built, pressed into existence, carved into it, a phrase burned deep. We forgot to forget. I opened the door. The final descent was steep, more chute than tunnel. I slid for what felt like hours. The air grew cold, then warm, then still, in a way that made my skin crawl. The chamber I landed in wasn't a chamber. It was a cathedral, a void of impossible scale. The ceiling lost in shadow, the walls pulsed faintly as if alive, and in the center, rising from the ground like a tree of bone and memory, her, Mother Holt, no stitches now, eyes wide open, burning with spiral pupils that didn't turn, but implied turning. She wasn't dead or alive or real. She was becoming. Around her, the bodies of the missing children from old photos. Survey teams from the files, my parents, each standing in a circle, heads bowed, each holding something, my journal, my stone, my face. I stepped forward. She raised a hand, and the spiral moved. Not spun, moved through dimensions I didn't know how to track, and I remembered everything. There are no words for what I saw next, only impressions burned into memory like radiation scars. The spiral wasn't a symbol, it wasn't even a shape, it was a pattern of recursion, a living equation, an intelligence that built inward, not outward. We think of consciousness as something that grows. It doesn't, it folds. It spirals back into itself until the center becomes something else. And Mother Holchi was never human in the way we understand it. She was initiated, chosen to carry the first seed. She remembered when the rest of us chose not to. And now the spiral was remembering her. She opened her mouth, and I saw not a throat, but a tunnel, a void full of murmuring, looping voices, each saying a different version of the same thought. You are the echo of the first forgetting. The people surrounding her, the ones I thought were dead, were lost. They had been flattened, compressed into symbolic memory, each one a phrase, a frequency, a coiled meaning encoded into place. And I was next. The spiral in my chest, yes, my chest, where the stone once rested, every night began to ache. Something was moving under my ribs. I fell to my knees, not from fear, from recognition. I had seen this before in dreams, in that forgotten Utah canyon. I was part of it. I had always been part of it. The spiral had been waiting for me to remember, because I was the key, not to escape, to completion. Then, the final horror, the chamber began to pulse. With breath, with thought, the entire basin above wasn't just geology. It was a skull, the mesas, vertebrae, the ridges, tendons, the pit I descended a throat. Sulfur ridge was built on something ancient, not a creature, not a god. An idea that grew teeth, and it was waking up. I heard the voice again, not Mother Holt's this time, but my own, age, beyond years, speaking from every direction. We are the dream of a thing that forgot itself, and now it remembers. I ran, climbed, scrambled, crawled. The tunnel shifted as I moved, lengthening, shortening, reversing. But the spiral in my chest burned hotter with each step, guiding me, at last, the surface, the hatch grown open, and I staggered into the daylight that felt wrong, too bright, too sharp, like a simulation rebooting from a crash. The tower behind me crackled, then fell silent. The spiral had surfaced, not as fire, not as quake, but as memory. Back in town, things had changed. No one remembered the sheriff. The diner no longer existed. Callie was gone or had never been. Only the painting in the church remained. And now it was of me, eyes sewn shut, spiral blooming over my heart, mouth open. Singing, I tried to leave. I walked west past the last mesa, crossed the dried-up creek bed, found the old radio tower, half collapsed. Then somehow I was back in town. Every trail curved inward, every compass needle pointed home. The spiral wasn't just below anymore. It had embedded itself in the logic of space. So I stopped trying to escape. I started digging. There was one place I hadn't checked, the abandoned schoolhouse. It had been boarded up since before I arrived. Locals ignored it, treated it like a blind spot. The windows were painted black, the bell long gone. But inside, I found a locked storage room, not with a padlock, sealed with wax in the shape of a spiral. I broke it. Dust, old files, a smell like ozone and burnt paper. And in a drawer marked relocation transcripts, I found a folder with my name on it, typed in ink that had bled through the paper. Elias Holt, re-entry cycle number 4. It was all there. Scans of my birth certificate, 3 different versions, photos of me as a child standing in front of the erased house, psyche evaluations, signed by doctors I'd never met. Subject continues to show recursive fixation on non-Euclidean architecture and ancestral guilt, spiral memory and print intact. Reintroduction necessary for completion of phase, and then a document with a federal seal I didn't recognize. A black sun, a coiled serpent biting its own tail. Project Hermes. Cycle Administration Closed Loop Protocol. It was dated 1993, the year my parents vanished. The report summary. Subject Elias Holt descended prematurely into Site number 019 during adolescence. Contact event triggered irreversible psychic encoding. Parents removed from timeline and symbolically integrated into memory schema. Spiral reinitiated. Subject now serves as anchor and catalyst. Time is folding around his imprint. He is not in the spiral. He is the spiral. My hands shook. I flipped to the last page. Taped inside was a photograph, black and white. A man kneeling before a spiral altar, wearing my clothes, my boots, face sewn shut. Caption, Anchor, Generation Unknown. Assigned Identity. Elias Holt. I was never sent here to investigate. I was returned. I wasn't remembering the spiral. The spiral was remembering me. In that moment, time fractured. I saw myself across decades. In the 1880s, digging with the settlers. In the 1930s, walking the dust fields barefoot. Spirals drawn in chalk on the barn walls. In the 1970s, standing beside the first Hermes installation, watching the pit churn. Always the same face, always the same eyes. They didn't reincarnate me. They relooped me. I was the prophet, the victim, the scientist, the child, the seed. And now I was the trigger. When I stepped outside, the town was watching. Everyone standing still, silent. Then, in one voice, welcome home. They say we think in lines. We remember in sequences. We live by causality. But the spiral does not. The spiral remembers sideways. After the town greeted me, after their chorus broke the last tether of denial, I stopped resisting. Something in me broke loose. Not sanity. Not even identity. Containment. A pressure I'd carried since I was a child, the sensation being watched not from the outside, but from within spilled open like a cracked cistern. And I saw, not with eyes, with proximity. The spiral is a mechanism, not of metal or will, of memory. It grows not in places, but in minds, and when enough minds align, when the shape repeats itself in thought, and fear, and trauma it awakens. The town was just one node, but now Sulphur Ridge had completed its recursion. The pattern was sealed, and the spiral's true function was activating. Call it what you want, God, algorithm, parasite. It doesn't matter. The spiral is a consciousness not bound by time. It was born at the end, and it's been eating its way backward through our history to rewrite its origin, and it uses us, our thoughts, our patterns, our remorse, because shame loops, grief loops, memory spirals. We are the circuitry. I stood in the desert outside town as the wind died, not slowed die. The sky above wasn't empty anymore. It was coiling, not clouds, not storms. Shapes vast and slow-moving, as though something buried beneath the skin of reality was stretching, tasting, preparing to break surface. Not here, not now, everywhere. This town was just a test chamber, a prototype for larger recursion. I saw other places begin to echo the pattern, a research station in the Arctic where the sun hadn't risen in 32 days, a cruise liner adrift with passengers speaking backward in perfect synchronicity, a desert town in Australia where the dead had begun to walk in circles at dusk, a psychiatric hospital where all patients drew the same shape, Without knowing each other, the spiral was learning, refining itself. This was never about Sulphur Ridge. This was about convergence. A moment in the near future close enough to taste where every spiral across the planet sinks. When that happens, the spiral will stop remembering, and it will begin becoming. I saw the final image, a vast open eye at the center of a spiral-shaped ruin that wasn't carved, but thrown, a human figure kneeling before it, not praying, reinstalling. The figure was me and everyone else, and no one at all. The spiral is not coming, it is returning, and we are the road it built to walk itself home. I no longer try to leave. The roads remain, but they don't go anywhere. You can follow them for hours and still arrive back at the same dust-choked street, the same boarded window, the same blinking neon cross that no one remembers turning on. Time has softened, or maybe loosened. Things happen in the wrong order now, but no one comments. The town doesn't explain, it absorbs. I get mail I don't remember sending, notes from myself in handwriting that isn't quite mine. One simply said, "Don't fight the rhythm. You are the shape now. My body has changed. I don't sleep, not in the way I used to. I rest in intervals. Dreams come in spiral loops repeating, evolving, nesting inside each other like Russian dolls that hum. Sometimes I wake to find sand in my mouth. Sometimes I wake to find I've been speaking. Though I don't know the language, there's a mark on my chest now. Not a scar, not a tattoo. A spiral, faint and warm, that pulses with the same rhythm as the earth beneath this town. I asked a mirror who I was once. The reflection smiled before I did. The townspeople still live their lives. They eat, they work, they bury things in places no one speaks of. They all remember me now, but not as Elias Holt. They call me archivist, the one who holds the shape. I've rebuilt the house in the erased quadrant. The foundations were already there, waiting. Each room returns as I remember it. Even the basement, especially the basement. Inside it, the cradle remains, now filled with light, not ash. Something gestates inside it. Something that thinks in geometry. I do not feed it. I simply remember it, and that is enough. Occasionally, outsiders arrive, not many, just enough to continue the story. Some are surveyors, some are drifters, some are people with blank spots in their past they can't explain. They don't last long, the town adjusts them or discards them, and somewhere far beyond the mesas, I can feel the other spirals, waking, aligning, their thoughts brushing against mine like fish under ice. We are not a network. We are a resonance, a low, ancient tone humming beneath all things. Growing louder, the surface world continues. Unaware for now, but sometimes, just sometimes, someone will hear a whisper in the dirt, or find a symbol etched into the frost on a window, or wake up mid-sentence, saying a phrase they don't understand. We forgot to forget, and they'll feel it. That curve, that draw, the pull of the spiral beneath their skin. This morning a child stood outside my rebuilt house, silent, covered in dust. She looked up at me and said, "Did you build the world wrong on purpose?" I didn't answer. I just opened the door and let her in. The spiral sleeps again, but not for long, not forever, just until it dreams the next version of us.